Flight attendant threw ice at a black CEO. Minutes later, the airline collapsed. If you ask for anything else, I'll throw this ice right in your face. Coach passengers don't get special treatment here. Those words didn't just hit the air, they pushed through it. Sharp and meant to cut. Spoken by a flight attendant who stood in the aisle with a steel-tight jaw and the kind of anger people save for strangers they think are beneath them. And before anyone had time to understand what was happening, she lifted her hand and threw a full handful of ice straight into the chest of Dr. Alana Porter, a quiet black woman who hadn't raised her voice, hadn't caused a scene, hadn't even done anything except ask, softly, if she could place her bag in the overhead compartment she had paid for. The ice scattered across her blouse, slipping down the soft fabric, falling toward the carpet as every passenger in first class froze in place. A man with a laptop paused mid-keystroke. A woman with a champagne glass stopped breathing for a second. A teenager blinked twice like he wasn't sure if he'd just seen what he thought he saw. And in the middle of that stunned silence, Alana stood completely still. Not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because somewhere deep inside, deep in her chest, deep in her memory, she felt a familiar ache. The ache of 100 small humiliations she'd swallowed over a lifetime. The ache of boardrooms where she wasn't welcomed until she signed the checks. The ache of airports where people grabbed her arm and asked, "Are you in the right line?" The flight attendant stepped forward again, her voice rising like she enjoyed the attention. "You heard me," she snapped, back to Coach. "People like you don't belong up here. You think just anyone walks into first class." The words weren't loud, they were carefully cruel, shaped with the confidence of someone who had never once been corrected. Alana let out a slow breath, steadying herself, her fingers brushing ice from her blouse without a hint of rage, just a heartbreaking tiredness that no one in the cabin could ignore now. She lifted her eyes, calm and controlled, and said softly, "Ma'am, I believe you're making a mistake." But the attendant rolled her eyes with a huff. "The only mistake is you walking up here like you own the place." And in that moment, the exact second those words left her mouth, the entire cabin felt something shift, like the air itself realized the truth before anyone else. Because Alana didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply reached into her bag with slow, deliberate calm and pulled out a folder that looked far too official for someone the attendant thought didn't belong. She held it gently, the way people hold things that can change lives, and she looked the attendant in the eyes with a quiet, devastating truth forming on her lips, one that would break the airline before the plane even left the ground. For a full 3 seconds after Alana lifted the folder, the cabin didn't breathe, not the passengers, not the attendant, not even the air pushing through the vent. Sand in that strange, suspended quiet, something powerful unfolded across her face. Not anger, not pride, but a deep, steady disappointment that felt heavier than shouting, heavier than crying, heavier than any reaction the flight attendant had expected. The attendant's smirk began to tremble, her throat tightening as if she suddenly sensed the shift in control. But she still clung to her arrogance like someone trying to hold onto the last piece of a sinking ship. "What is that supposed to be?" she said sharply, though her voice cracked on the last word. Alana didn't answer right away. She simply held the folder a moment longer, her hands steady, but her eyes soft with the kind of quiet strength that made a few of the passengers sit up straighter, recognizing a dignity they hadn't given her a chance to show. When Alana finally opened it, the papers inside glowed faintly under the overhead lights, the airline's logo printed at the top, bold, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. "Ma'am," she said gently, "before you threw ice at me, before you ordered me to leave first class, before you decided who I was, you should have known who signs your company's executive checks." A murmur rippled through the cabin, whispers colliding like waves crashing against each other. "And executive. Wait. Executive checks." I knew she looked familiar. The flight attendant blinked, confusion sliding into fear as she took a half step back. You're lying," she whispered, but the tremble in her jaw betrayed her. Alana didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, didn't try to humiliate her. She simply turned the top page around, the one with her name printed clean across the header. Dr. Alana Porter, majority shareholder and incoming board chair, Sky High Airlines. The cabin gasped, a collective inhale as if a window had shattered, and the teenage boy with the phone nearly dropped it. The businessman in C2A muttered, "Oh my God," while the flight attendant's face drained of color so fast it looked as if someone had pulled all the warmth out of her. She stumbled back another step, hands shaking. I didn't know," she whispered, but the apology was too small to cover the damage she'd done. And Elena, with that same calm strength, simply said, "That's the part that hurts. You didn't think you needed to." Those words echoed through the cabin with a weight that settled on every passenger listening, not as a lecture, but as a truth they all suddenly felt responsible for hearing. And just as the flight attendant opened her mouth to speak again, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, unusually tense. "Dr. Porter, we need to speak with you immediately." The captain's voice hanging in the air shifted the entire cabin like someone had cracked a window in a room full of secrets, and every passenger turned their head toward the front of the plane, trying to catch sight of the man whose tone carried more fear than authority. Even the flight attendant who had thrown the ice stiffened, her hands tightening around the drink tray, because for the first time in her career she could feel the power slipping out from under her feet. Dr. Elena Porter didn't rush, didn't panic. She closed the folder with a slow, deliberate motion, as if sealing the truth inside had always been her choice, then lifted her eyes toward the cockpit door with a calmness none of them could look away from. "I'll join him in a moment," she said softly, and the simple sentence held more command than the attendant had used all afternoon. She took a step forward, just one, and the entire first-class cabin parted like water around a stone. Passengers moving their legs, shifting their trays, pulling back their bags without being asked, as if instinctively recognizing they were standing in the presence of someone whose dignity demanded space. The flight attendant swallowed hard, her face pale as she whispered, I didn't know who you were." But Elena didn't even glance at her, not out of cruelty, but because the pain the woman caused wasn't something a single apology could erase. Elena reached the curtain separating first class from the cockpit hallway, but she paused there, her hand resting gently against the fabric, her eyes drifting over the passengers who were still staring, some guilty, some stunned, some deeply ashamed for staying silent. And then, for the first time since stepping onto the plane, her calm cracked just a little, her eyes softening with a sadness so human, pulled at the chest of every person watching. "Do you know what it feels like?" she said quietly, not to anyone in particular, but to everyone at once, to be treated as less in a room you built. Her voice carried no anger, only truth, and that truth sank into the cabin like lead, settling into the hearts of every person who had witnessed the humiliation without lifting a finger to stop it. A woman near the window covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheek. A man in a suit lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Even the teenage boy recording slowly lowered his phone, as if understanding the weight of the moment demanded his full humanity, not a video. And with that, Elena finally pushed the curtain aside and walked toward the cockpit, her steps steady, her dignity untouched, leaving behind a cabin full of people who suddenly realized they had been sitting in the presence of greatness, and failed to recognize it until it was almost too late. The hallway leading to the cockpit felt narrower than it really was, not because of the space, but because of the weight of the moment pressing on every inch of air. Dr. Elena Porter walked with the same quiet dignity she carried through boardrooms and press conferences. But inside, deep beneath her calm breathing, there was a tightness in her chest that only people who've spent a lifetime being underestimated could understand. When she reached the cockpit door, the captain was already waiting, his uniform still crisp but his expression shaken. He stepped out quickly, closing the door behind him as if protecting the crew from what he feared was coming. "Dr. Porter," he said, eyes wide, voice trembling slightly, I had no idea you were on this flight." He rubbed the back of his neck, guilt knotting his face. "No one notified me. I'm so sorry for what happened back there." Elena studied him quietly, noticing the way his shoulders slumped, the way his breath hitched, the way shame settled across his features like he was wearing it for the first time. She didn't want apologies, she wanted accountability. She wanted truth. "Captain," she said gently, "are you aware your airline has received 27 discrimination complaints in the last 9 months?" His face went pale. 27. He whispered, I knew we had issues with service, but she held up a hand, not to silence him, but to stop the excuses before they were born. "The issue isn't service," she said softly, "it's culture. And cultures don't break in a day, they crack over time." The captain swallowed hard, his eyes shining with a mix of fear and respect. "Dr. Porter, what do you want me to do?" she sighed. And for a moment her voice softened, carrying the weight of every black woman who had ever had to stay calm in a room built to deny her dignity. "I want this airline to stop pretending problems go away when they're ignored." She glanced toward the curtain behind her, the memory of ice hitting her chest still fresh in her mind. "I want people held accountable. Not because I'm the owner," her voice lowered, "but because I'm a human being who deserved better." The captain nodded slowly, emotion catching in his throat. "You'll have my full cooperation," he said firmly. "Whatever you need." Elena took a long, steady breath, and just as she turned to walk back toward the cabin, a flight attendant from the front galley rushed forward with panic in her eyes. "Captain," she whispered, "you need to see this right now." The captain stiffened. Elena paused, and the woman held up a tablet screen that showed something capable of destroying the airline in a single blow. The captain stared at the tablet as if the screen itself had turned to fire, his breath catching in his throat while the color drained slowly from his face. Dr. Elena Porter watched him carefully, her hands folded calmly in front of her, though her heart tightened with a sense of knowing the moment before a storm, knowing the feeling of truth rising faster than people are ready for. The second flight attendant trembled as she held the tablet, whispering, "It's already online. And it's spreading fast." The captain hesitated, then finally turned the screen toward Elena. There, in crystal clear video, was the exact moment the first attendant threw ice at her, caught perfectly by a teenage passenger. The clip was only 20 seconds long, but it carried a lifetime of weight. No context, no excuses, just a black woman standing quietly and being humiliated in front of a full cabin. Under the video, thousands of comments exploded like fireworks. "Fire her immediately. This is why we need change. Who treats a customer like this?" And then the one comment that shifted everything. "Isn't that Dr. Elena Porter, the new board chair?" The captain swallowed hard, sweat beading along his hairline as he whispered, "Ma'am, the board has already seen this. The investors too. Phones are blowing up on the ground." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, not out of anger, but out of the bone-deep exhaustion of knowing she wasn't just dealing with a moment, she was dealing with a system. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. "What happens next depends on what you choose to do," she said softly. The captain straightened, fear turning into resolve. "Then I'll do what should have been done a long time ago." He handed the tablet back, stepped into the aisle, and signaled for every attendant to move forward because the reckoning had officially begun. The captain stepped back into the aisle with a tense, shaken breath, and the moment his voice carried through the cabin, passengers straightened like they could feel history unfolding around them. He didn't shout, didn't put on the usual customer service tone. He spoke with the gravity of someone who finally understood the truth he'd been ignoring for too long. "All flight attendants to the front," he said, and his voice cracked not from weakness, but from the weight of what he had seen. The first attendant, the one who'd thrown the ice, stood frozen near row 3, her face pale, hands shaking so badly she could barely steady the drink cart. The other attendants exchanged uncertain looks before slowly walking toward the front, sensing something bigger than a reprimand. Dr. Elena Porter followed quietly, her steps soft, controlled, filled with a kind of grace that made the passengers' hearts clench. When the attendants lined up, the captain faced them and his eyes locked onto the one who'd humiliated Elena. "Do you understand," he began, voice thick, "that your actions today didn't just break policy, they broke something far more important?" The attendant swallowed hard, eyes glossing over, but no tears came, only fear. The captain continued, "You didn't just disrespect a passenger, you disrespected a leader of this airline." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Even the guilty attendant inhaled sharply, her knees weakening. The captain turned toward Elena with genuine remorse. "Dr. Porter, you have full authority. Whatever you decide, we follow." And for the first time since the ice hit her chest, the entire plane looked at Elena not with doubt, but with absolute respect. For a long, breath-heavy moment, the entire cabin hovered in a silence that felt almost sacred, as if every passenger understood they were witnessing something bigger than a flight delay or a mid-air argument. They were watching a woman who had been humiliated reclaim her dignity in a room that once treated her like she didn't deserve it. Dr. Elena Porter stood in front of the line of attendants with a calm so steady it unsettled even the passengers who had stayed silent earlier. The attendant who'd thrown the ice couldn't hold her gaze. Her eyes kept darting to the carpet, to the seats, to the door, anywhere but the woman she had tried to tear down. Her breath came in quick, uneven shivers, her fingers twisting nervously as the reality of her choices finally forced itself into her chest. "Dr. Porter," she whispered, voice cracking into something fragile and unfamiliar. I don't know why I acted the way I did." She swallowed hard. That wasn't the real me. Elena looked at her, not with anger, not with pity, but with the heavy quiet of someone who has heard the same excuse too many times in too many rooms. "The real you," she said gently, "is revealed in the moments when you think no one important is watching." The attendant's lips trembled, tears forming but refusing to fall. The captain lowered his head, as if ashamed that such cruelty had taken place under his command. Elena exhaled softly, and her voice softened in a way that broke the room's heart. "Do you know how many people," she said, "spend their whole lives being judged the second they walk through a door?" A couple en route looked away. A businessman wiped his eyes. Even the flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, realizing this wasn't just about today, it was about every day someone like Elena had been forced to swallow disrespect with a quiet smile. "I'm not here to destroy you," she continued, "but I am here to make sure this airline understands something it should have learned long before today." She paused, letting the weight settle into every corner of the plane. "People deserve respect before you know their title." And at that exact moment, the captain's radio crackled violently, followed by a panicked voice from the ground crew saying words no airline ever wants to hear. "We have an emergency situation, Dr. Porter. It's about the company." The captain's radio crackled again, louder this time, filled with urgency that spread through the cabin like a cold wind. "Dr. Porter, do you copy? The board is calling an emergency shutdown meeting. The incident video has gone worldwide. Investors are pulling out. The airline system is collapsing right now." The words slammed into everyone at once. The attendants froze. Passengers held their breath. Even the engines seemed to hum differently, as if the entire plane understood that something far bigger than turbulence was shaking the sky tonight. Dr. Elena Porter stood perfectly still, her fingers tightening softly around the edge of the seat beside her, not because she was shocked but because she had known, somewhere deep inside, that the company had cracks long before one cruel woman threw ice at her. The cabin watched her closely, waiting for anger, panic, blame, anything. But instead, Elena closed her eyes and took a slow, steady breath filled with years of carrying weight nobody ever saw. When she opened them, the strength inside her gaze could have grounded the entire aircraft. "Patch me through," she said quietly. The captain tapped the radio, and the boardroom erupted through the speakers, voices shaking, arguing, shouting over each other. "Dr. Porter, we need direction now," another executive barked. "The videos hit every major platform. We're losing millions every hour. Staff morale is tanking. Flights are being canceled." Elena raised a hand, silencing them without a word. The entire cabin listened. "This airline didn't collapse because of a video," she said. "It collapsed because of a culture." Her voice was soft, but it wrapped itself around every frightened executive, every guilty attendant, every silent passenger. People don't leave companies over mistakes. They leave companies that refuse to fix them. A hush fell over the boardroom feed, over the plane, over the hearts of everyone listening. "Shut the airline down?" Elena said finally. Gasps spread across the cabin. Even the captain's knees weakened. "Not forever," she clarified. But until we rebuild it from the inside out, training, accountability, leadership, humanity, her chest rose slowly. We start fresh. The board hesitated, then one by one whispered their agreement. And when the call ended, Elena turned back to the cabin, her cabin now standing tall in the aisle where she had been humiliated just 20 minutes before. Respect, she said quietly, is how we restart. And as she walked back to her seat, the passengers rose not out of fear, but out of honor.